The judge asked why I didn't bring the documentation from my safe. My brother smiled. I cleaned it out. He didn't need it. The courtroom went quiet. Then the judge did something nobody expected. The moment my brother Garrett smiled in that courtroom, I knew he thought he'd won. He sat at the plaintiff's table in his tailored navy suit. His attorney whispered something in his ear. He nodded slowly, confidently. Meanwhile, I stood at the witness stand with empty hands, racing heart, unable to produce the documents that would prove everything I'd been saying for 8 months. Judge Eleanor Whitfield peered at me over her reading glasses, her expression somewhere between confusion and disappointment. She'd asked a simple question. Where was the documentation from my father's safe? The safe that contained the original will, the property deeds, the insurance policies, 23 years of meticulous financial records. My mouth went dry. I looked at my attorney, Raymond Okonkwo. He closed his eyes briefly, the kind of gesture that told me he was preparing for the worst. I turned back to the judge, said the only thing I could say. Your Honor, I don't have them anymore. That's when Garrett leaned back in his chair, spoke the words that would change everything. I cleaned it out. He didn't need it. The courtroom went so quiet, I could hear the bailiff's leather belt creak. Judge Whitfield's pen stopped moving. She looked at my brother with an expression I couldn't quite read. But to understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 8 months earlier, in my father's hospital room at St. Vincent's Medical Center, watching monitors track his heartbeat in green peaks and valleys. Dad had been fighting pancreatic cancer for 14 months. We all knew we were in the final stretch. He'd called both of us there for an important conversation. I was 34 years old, a civil engineer working for the city of Portland. I'd spent the past year driving an hour each way to see him 3 times a week. Garrett was 37, lived 15 minutes from the hospital, had visited maybe 6 times total. That afternoon, with October rain streaking the window, Dad told us about the safe. A fireproof document safe in the basement of the family home, the same house where Garrett now lived. He'd moved in 2 years prior when his second divorce left him homeless. Everything you need is in that safe, Dad said, his voice thin but clear. The will, the property deeds, the life insurance. Nathan, I'm naming you executor. Your brother knows this. I looked at Garrett. He just nodded slowly, arms crossed over his chest. Dad had made his decision years ago. Dad passed away on November 3rd. The funeral was on a Saturday, gray morning, nearly 200 people. Garrett gave a moving eulogy that made several people cry. I sat in the front row, too numb to speak. The following Thursday, I drove to the family home to retrieve the documents. Garrett met me at the door with a beer in his hand. Barely noon. The house looked different, messier, dishes piled in the sink, mail stacked on every flat surface. I asked him to show me where Dad had kept the safe. He shrugged, said he'd moved it to the garage because the basement got damp. We walked out together. There it was, gray steel, about 3 feet tall, the same one I remembered from childhood. Garrett handed me the key, said Dad had given it to him before he died. I opened the safe, expecting to find everything Dad had described. The original will, the insurance policies, the property deeds for the house, the rental property up in Salem, the lakefront cabin near Bend. Instead, I found a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note in what looked vaguely like Dad's handwriting. Something about the lettering seemed off. The note said, I leave everything to Garrett. He needs it more. Nathan will understand. My heart started pounding. I read it 3 times, then looked at my brother. He was leaning against the garage door frame, watching me with an expression I couldn't identify. Dad changed his mind, Garrett said, his voice flat. He told me a couple months ago this couldn't be right. Dad had been explicit with me multiple times about his wishes, but here was this note, and here was my brother insisting this was Dad's final wish. Over the next 8 months, things escalated. Garrett filed the handwritten note with probate court. He drained Dad's bank accounts, $60,000 in cash, 3 days after Dad's death, using a power of attorney document I'd never seen before. Now here we were, that courtroom, the judge staring at my brother, her pen frozen above her legal pad, the silence stretching into something uncomfortable. Then Judge Whitfield slowly removed her reading glasses, set them on the bench, folded her hands, and said something that made Garrett's smile disappear completely. Full story is linked below or on my channel.